Welcome to Duck Season Somewhere podcast. This episode is brought to you by the following sponsors. GetDucks.com, your proven source for the very best waterfowl hunting adventures. Argentina, Mexico, 6 whole continents worth. For 2 decades, we've delivered real duck hunts for real duck hunters. And USHuntlist.com, because the next great hunt is closer than you think. Search our database of proven U.S. and Canadian outfits. Contact them directly with confidence. Trust is earned. By the numbers, 121 waterfowl subspecies bagged on 6 continents, 20 countries, 36 U.S. states, and growing. I spend upwards of 225 days per year chasing ducks, geese, and swans worldwide. And I don't choose shotguns for their brand name or the cool factor. Y'all know me way better than that. I've shot Benelli for over 2 decades. I continue shooting Benelli shotguns for their simplicity, utter reliability, and superior performance. Whether hunting near home or halfway across the world, that is the stuff that matters. Sit means sit and stay until it doesn't. No matter how well or how often trained, retrievers want those ducks as badly as we do, maybe even more. Chardog might be titled, but she's still just a dog. I'm over 50 years old and I still do dumb stuff, trust me. Retrievers are family. I wouldn't endanger my children near heavy traffic, and I'm not going to risk my dog jumping in front of blazing guns either. Gundog Outdoors' patented quick-release safety system is fully adjustable, tethers to any blind or stand, has titanium stakes for frozen ground, and a quick-release marine-grade shackle to quickly release Fido when the smoke clears. Visit gundogoutdoors.com. Connect with them on Instagram at Gundog Outdoors to see their growing line of Gundog safety and performance products. Enter hashtag GetDucks to receive 15% discount off of your first order. Boss Shot Shell's copper-plated bismuth tin alloy is the good old days again. Steel shot's come a long way in the past 30 years, but will never, ever perform like good old-fashioned lead. Say goodbye to all that gimmicky, high recoil, compensation, science, hype, and hello to superior performance. Know your pattern, take ethical shots, make clean kills. That is the boss way. The good old days are now. It really is duck season somewhere for 365 days per year. Duck Season Somewhere takes me year-round to worldwide destinations where I visit with the most interesting people. I'm your host, Ramsey Russell. Join me here to listen to those conversations. Welcome back to Duck Season Somewhere, the story of Holt Collier. Joining me today are Minor Ferris Buchanan and Hank Burdine. I just got to say this again. Money don't buy nothing in the canebrake no-how. And a man's dogs don't care whether he's rich or poor. Where'd that come from, Minor?
Well, Holt was, as I said before, Holt made a lot of money in the wintertime during the hunting season. And he's often quoted as having $1,000 in his possession. And there was one time it was mentioned that he had over $2,000 in his possession. And this is more money than even the plantation owners were making during this period of time. And as the years went by, he was highly undisciplined when it came to spending his money. Probably very generous, but we know that he would, in the springtime, would get on a train and he would follow the fairs. He would go to Texas. He'd go to Louisiana. To Florida, we know, and I suspect up into Kentucky and following the old trail that he and Howell Hines had taken when he was a child. But the problem was he would spend it all. Every penny he had made, there was one occasion when his brother Marshall had to wire him money so he could afford a train ticket home. And as the years went by and the deer population and the bear population declined, some of his friends said, Holt, you need to save some money. You need to start respecting money a little bit more. And that's when that quote came came from. Is you can't spend money in the cane brake, and your dog doesn't know whether you're rich or poor. Well, as luck would have it, before it got too late, he did buy a lot in Greenville and built a house on it, and the house is still standing. Mm-hmm. And
it's about a half a block from Doe's Eat Place.
I did not know that.
It is, and one thing about it is if you're standing in front of this house and you look at the neighborhood's full of one-story houses. This is a two-story house. And it's two stories because Holt was one of the old denizens of the Delta. He saw the yearly floods, and he knew, I don't care how big that levee is out there, this water's coming back in. So in the 1927 flood, Holt Collier lived in the second floor of his house, while all of his neighbors lived up on the levee.
There's an old story that the Metcalf brothers, owned a big chunk of the Commercial National Bank there in Greenville. And they were on the way back out to Newstead Plantation one day on their horses. And they stopped by Holt's. Correct me if I'm wrong, mine on this. Holt every now and then would do a little bootlegging on the side. Now, Holt didn't drink whiskey, but he'd bootleg a little bit on the side every now and then. And the Metcalf brothers stopped by there to have a little nip on the way home. And while they were there, the Metcalfs noticed that there was a new shake shingle roof on his house. And Mr. Metcalf, one of them asked him, said, "Holt, yes, you got a new roof on this house?" Yes, I got brand new. He said, "You had a problem with it, got a new." He said, "Where'd you get the money for that roof?" He said, "I went down to your bank, I borrowed that money." He said, "You got another one of them shingles?" And Holt brought a shingle in there, and as the story goes, Mr. Metcalf wrote a note on that shingle, "Paid in full." He said, "Drop this by the bank on your way next to town."
On a shingle.
On a shingle.
Yeah.
And that shingle was around, if I recall, I mean, that shingle was a source of the story. It survived for a long time. I don't know where it is now, but it was a conversation piece for the longest time. You got it. And at that point in time, we're talking about an older Holt.
Yeah.
He's an elderly man at that point in time.
Well, back in his younger days now, Holt had been back. He was hunting bears in the cane brake. It almost died in that hollow log. And his reputation had reached heroic proportions. 125 bears a season, 2,100 that he kept in a book, like a hunting journal, until a house burned down.
His brother Marshall's house burned down.
And his circle of friends based a lot on his upbringings and his service, and especially around the celebrated sport, and it was a huge sport back in the day of bear hunting. He rubbed elbows with governors and senators and general and the wealthy and planters and their children. I mean, he was in the top circles of social society at that time because of bear hunting. Is that right?
He was, and I think it grew. It got larger every year. When it really probably it was just a living for him in the earlier years, but as the bear population was denuded in the Delta, and it got a little bit harder to find them. Holt knew how to find them then, and he couldn't kill 125. So when we get into the 1890s, 1895, that kind of thing, there were just limited number of bear at that point. He became they'd have people come down from Chicago and hire him, so he became a guide and made good money doing that. Mm-hmm. And he had a reputation for putting on very successful hunts, and of course culminated in the most famous hunt ever to take place on American soil.
Let's not go there just yet, but we're going there. First, I want to back up, and along with his celebrity, he had also become a deputy sheriff.
He was deputized quite often. This would have been during and after Reconstruction, and as these folks knew, law enforcement knew that Holt didn't back down to anybody. He was good with a gun, and he guarded prisoners and that kind of thing. And I like to tell the story about Travis Elmore Sage. In 1868, Holt had been told by the sheriff to be on the lookout for an outlaw out of Louisiana named Travis Elmore Sage. He had killed in cold blood 2 very prominent people in Tensas Parish, and he was thought to be hiding out in the Mississippi Delta woods. And Holt just happened to be going out, starting his yearly hunt, and he had a wagon full of supplies, and he was leaving Greenville, and he got to a place called Washburn's Ferry on the Beaufalia. Am I pronouncing that right? Beaufalia River, which is really just a stream. But this guy named Washburn had a ferry there. And there was a porch on the ferry, and there's a man sitting on a horse talking to Mr. Washburn standing on the porch. And this fella fits the description of Travis Elmore Sage. And so Holt walks up to him and wants to disarm him. Well, he doesn't walk up to him and say you're under arrest and point a gun at him or anything like that. He says, man, that's a fine-looking rifle you got there. You mind if I look at it? And so he takes and he's looking at it, and he sets it on the porch and pulls his handgun out and says, you're under arrest. You're Travis Elmore Sage. And the man's still sitting on his horse. And the Washburn takes the rifle and passes it back to Travis Elmore Sage, who's sitting on his horse, and Sage gets the rifle and cocks it and bringing it down to point it at Holt, and it hits the horse right between the barrel, the muzzle hits the horse right between the ears. And I don't know if you know, that's a very sensitive spot on a horse. And the horse flinches just enough that Holt can get a bead on Sage, and he shoots him. So I call this the gunfight at Washburn's Ferry, because Travis Elmore Sage has a cocked rifle pointing at Holt, and Holt gets the first round off. Of course, dead shot, right, a heart shot. Man hits the ground. He's dead when he hits the ground with a cocked rifle in his hands. And they have a coroner's inquest, and of course Holt's found not to be guilty of anything. That he's never tried, never charged with anything. So that's the second white man that Holt killed during this period of time that we know about. And but the story of Travis Elmore Sage and the two men that he killed over in Tensall Parish is a story unto itself.
It was, and it was, like you said, during this time period. We're talking about the late 1800s. The railroads, to whom he'd sold bear meat to feed their laborers, and they were so effective with the loggers and everything else. It started to it had started to just absolutely wreck that vast tract of wilderness that the bears lived and thrived in. So he did transition from market hunting to the guide, and I remember a reference to at this time about the Metcalf brothers that Hank was talking about. What can be said about them and their influence or their relationship to Holt?
Well, they were big Delta planters up north of Greenville, owned big chunks of bank stock, like I said, and they hunted. Back in those days when they were growing up, we still had a lot of woods around the Beaufly, and they hunted around there. But as William Faulkner said, that by this time, within 2 generations, the Mississippi Delta was de-rivered, de-swamped, and denuded. And all of the high ground up in the upper part of the Delta had been cleared. And in the South Delta, that's where the river would still flood and creep back up between the levees down there, and that's where the woods, the last of the big woods, were down there in the South Delta. And the Metcalfs had become such close friends with Holt Collier that they're all considered like brothers, I believe. I mean, they would go off hunting, take on 2 or 3 weeks at a time, being together, camping together, eating together, hunting together, and they were just very close friends. And, of course, with the Percy family also, and then it was just a camaraderie that was, that was rarely seen in those days, but it was. And there's Holt Collier right in the middle of them.
Mm-hmm. And you were telling me earlier, Minor, it was in their likeness that Faulkner probably fashioned the McCaslins in the book, The Bear.
I don't think there's any question about it. Holt Collier died in 1936, and with his death, the currency of his story was retold. Many newspaper articles, his obituary was almost a full page, front page of the Greenville newspaper, And William Faulkner's second home was Greenville, Mississippi. He lived in Oxford, but he spent a lot of time.
Spent a lot of time with Ben Watson, who was
that.
a college roommate and was one of his agents, and he and Ben Watson were so close. So close.
And Holt Collier, he died at age 90 in 1936, but he was a legend on the streets of Greenville in his old age. He was many articles written about seeing Holt Collier walking down the street, still wearing his Confederate hat, which he wore all his life, and with it turned up in the front, carrying a 6-shooter. In just picture this 1832 walking down the streets of Greenville, armed, but he was, people let Holt Collier carry a gun. It wasn't any big deal. He was well respected by everybody.
The Confederate cap wasn't a cap like you think of a Confederate cap.
It's just like on the cover of the book.
It was a cowboy hat. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever ridden a horse at breakneck speed, you know the first thing going to happen to the bill of that cowboy hat is going to flap straight up. Mm-hmm. Well, that was the signature of the 9th Texas Cavalry.
If you read the
regimental, wore them like that all the time.
Read the regimental histories of the 9th Texas Cavalry. That is the hat they wore. It was turned up in the front. I think there was an old Walt Disney movie made where it depicted that. But
kind of like Yosemite Sam.
Sam. But so Holt dies in 1936. He's well known as a character of Greenville, seen on the streets. William Faulkner is known to be in Greenville weeks and months at a time during this period of time. So all this retelling of Holt's story that takes place from 1936 and the Bear comes out, I can't remember, was 1938 or 39.
Yeah,
there's no question in my mind that William Faulkner, who was known to use real characters to fashion and create his fictional characters, used the Metcalfs were the McCaslins, and Sam Fathers was Holt Collier. And the hunt with the 10-year-old boy,
Isaac, is probably their son, probably one of their sons.
It's actually, I got a picture of
the
real event.
Shot that 300-pound bear.
Right, and that's the last known. That's the last documented bear kill in a hunt in which Holt Collier was associated, that I'm aware of.
Let's back up to 1901, because this is a heck of a story. It's a story I grew up hearing, but didn't fully understand until I read your book. One of the most famous bear hunts, maybe on God's earth. President Theodore Roosevelt, who was a big game hunter of epic proportion, a celebrity, he knew that the habitat was dwindling, that these bears were running out of time because of civilization moving in and the loss of the big woods. And he wanted to come down to Mississippi and hunt one of those bears. And let's talk about that.
Well, Theodore Roosevelt was a noted conservationist and hunter, and even before he became world famous as president, vice president, because he had formed the Boone and Crockett Club in 1886. And he's reading all these. Bear hunting was very popular and was being written about. I can't remember the names of the magazines right offhand, but they were getting wide circulation, and he was reading these articles, and they were all in the Deep South. I think Bobo was being written about. I'm not sure Collier had been written about but
Bobo had been, yeah.
But he had Theodore Roosevelt wanted to come down south and participate in one of these hunts, and he wanted to participate as in the chase. He didn't want to be put on a stand, but it's through a long process with Stuyvesant Fish and
who was
Leroy
president of the
Percy.
I.C. Railroad.
Stuyvesant Fish was president of the Illinois Central Railroad, and he learned about Roosevelt's desire, and he says, "Well, we can set it up." And so Fish gets in touch with Leroy Percy, and Leroy Percy uses his influence to get it set up, and Collier sitting on his porch one day, and somebody comes out and says, if you can find us a place to hunt, Holt, it just might happen that we'll host a presidential hunt. Well, this was 1902, and the closest bear population Holt could find was 45 miles away in Sharkey County. And so it happened. It came to pass that Roosevelt came to Mississippi and got off the train, came by train, got off the train at a little just a platform called Smead's Plantation. And there was a little general store there. And Roosevelt gets off. You've got John Parker. John Parker is an amazing character. He was later became governor of Louisiana and later became vice presidential candidate on the Bull Moose ticket with Roosevelt in 1916. Roosevelt ultimately withdrew from that campaign. But at any rate, John Parker was on that hunt, and they all meet at Smead's, and they go. That's when Theodore Roosevelt meets Holt Collier, and it's pretty good. Roosevelt walks up to Collier and shakes his hand. So you're Holt Collier, the great bear hunter, with it shining his teeth, and Collier tells that story, and they proceed to ride by horseback 14 miles due east, not west, due east, to the banks of the Little Sunflower River, where Holt has found signs of lots of significant bear activity. And they camp out there in a very rustic, rough campsite, and Roosevelt is just real overconfident. I'm going to kill a bear the first thing out. And there are several other hunters. Leroy Percy is there. John Park is there.
McElhaney.
John McElhaney, who had a little startup business called Tabasco sauce, but McElhaney had ridden with Roosevelt in Cuba, and so McElhaney was there actually at the president's invitation, and they standing around the campfire. Roosevelt insists on killing a bear the next day. Everybody's on the instructions that Roosevelt gets the first shot.
Let me just interject here. You know, as this was building up, the president's going to come. Obviously, the media went wild, and he wanted secrecy, and he tried to impress upon his host before he got there. Look, let's keep it to a minimum.
Correct.
He was there for the hunt. I'm a serious hunter, and he said, a quote, "In my experience, to try to combine a hunt and a picnic generally means a spoiled picnic and always means a spoiled hunt. I want to hunt and do see that I get the first bear. See that." And, you know, hunting, and all these duck hunters listening know this, it's so much more than a dead animal. It's a social affair, especially when you come to the Mississippi Delta and you're hunting hounds or you're hunting hogs or you're hunting bear, you're hunting ducks. It's a social sport, and it just bears the word hospitality. And I love this quote by Holt Collier saying, of course, him being a stranger, we wanted to make sure he killed a bear.
That's true.
Now,
Now,
just Southern hospitality.
Another thing along that line, the president, there was a lot of press that caught wind of it and came, but they weren't allowed to go. They stayed at Smead's Landing. And they also brought a bunch of protection with the president, all the Secret Service and all like that. They stayed at Smead's Landing. Holt Collier said he protected more by me right here in this Mississippi Delta than he is with all the police in Washington, D.C.
I believe that. Please continue. So they're at Smead's Plantation, and
well, Smead's Plantation. Well, it's really the general store, and there are a couple of little houses there, and I say it's just a platform. But we found a photograph in an attic down in St. Francisville, Louisiana, of President Roosevelt on a horse in front of that general store, and right there on the front of that general store is one of these telegraph signs. Mm-hmm. So these newsmen were allowed to come out to the campsite 14 miles away for an hour a day, talk to people, find out what happened. Then they'd go back and they would send in their news story by telegraph. And that, if you want to get the President of the United States, I sometimes wish we had that kind of situation today. But these guys were not allowed out there. And the campsite was cordoned off by armed black men. Mm-hmm. And this was it's worthy of note that this is a period of time in the Deep South politics when things start to change. And there was a guy named James K. Vardaman who was running for governor at the very time this hunt was taking place, and he was a Democrat, and he was the headlines were absolutely horrible, accusing Theodore Roosevelt, the Republican, of trying to come down here and influence the black vote.
Huh.
And the stuff that was said by Vardaman and the white politicians across Mississippi, of course, these people that we're talking about that were friends of Holt were really, I mean, the Leroy Percy was as solid. He was impeccable when it came to racial issues, but
well, we can take a sidebar. We can take a sidebar to talk briefly about Leroy Percy because you know, after the Civil War, a lot of the blacks left.
Mm-hmm.
And Leroy Percy was such a gentleman. He was appointed to get them back, not as slaves, but as workers. And he actually established the town of
Mound Bow. Well, at any rate, I just point out that there's a very significant political upheaval taking place and around this event. And Vardaman ultimately is elected governor. And that's when you start seeing some very harsh racial tone come about. But in my research, I really didn't see it prior to 1902. As a matter of fact, one of Holt's workers on this hunt is a guy named Swint Pope. He's a black fellow, and he is a duly elected justice of the peace in Sharkey County.
I'll be
at the time in 1902. I'm looking at this picture here. Huger Foote was on this hunt. This is the 1902 presidential hunt. You got E.C. Mangum, who's one of the owners of the plantation. I think he was also on the board of the Illinois Central Railroad.
Huger Foote was Shelby Foote's grandfather.
Huger Foote was Shelby Foote's grandfather. So the circle came around because I talked to Shelby Foote 2 or 3 times about when I was doing the research of this book. Shelby Foote, who actually lived to see the book in print, the only person who knew Holt who saw the book in print. But he told me, because he was from Greenville, he said, I remember him as a child. We would drive by his house, and I'd see him up on the porch with all the other kids. In his old age, Holt would have the children of the neighborhood up there, and he'd tell his stories of his life. And Shelby Foote said, I'd drive by, but I never went up on that porch. And he'd pause, and he'd say, of all the regrets I have in my childhood, that's the most significant regret, that I never actually met Holt Collier.
Wow.
John Parker, as I described, Swint Pope. A guy named Jacob Dickinson was on this hunt. At the time, he was the general counsel of the Illinois Central Railroad, but his story is a good one. He, at the age of 14, he was from Columbus, Mississippi, and he actually became a runaway and joined the Confederacy at the age of 14, and he's the fellow who wrote the article that said duel in the canebrake that I described earlier. And so when you're ready to hear how it went on the hunt, let me know.
I do because now to bring people back, that was very interesting. We're between the Big and Little Sunflower Rivers, east of Smead Stop, which would pretty much be Delta National Forest today.
Right south of Onward, Mississippi, and right in the middle of Delta National.
Which is, if you look at a map of the Delta today, it's by far the largest existing bottomland hardwood forest in the state of Mississippi right now. So that's where this is taking place. What next? What happened now?
Well, they ride out there, and Roosevelt insists on having the first shot. We also have that night around the campfire. You have Leroy Percy, I don't think Leroy Percy takes part in the hunt. He's more of a day guest, and he comes down there on a frequent basis. He may have even stayed there. But I don't recall any mention of him actually being a hunter. But the stories of Holt Collier's life dominate the conversation around the campfire. And Roosevelt absolutely becomes enthralled with the story of Holt Collier. And he insists on hearing everything, and he's, according to everybody else, Roosevelt just won't leave him alone, and becomes enamored with him. And finally, this story comes out about Holt Collier was accused of killing James King, a Union officer. And here's Leroy Percy standing right beside him, whose father represented Holt Collier. And Theodore Roosevelt insists on knowing what happened. He insists on knowing, did you kill James King? Now, I can only imagine the dialogue that took place at that point. And Collier said, I was told by Mr. Percy's father never to tell anybody what happened out there in that duel in the canebrake. But somehow they convinced Holt to tell Theodore Roosevelt what happened out there when James King was killed. I can only assume a pardon might have been mentioned. I don't know. You can imagine.
The only man that could pardon him was right
He could have done the log next to him. That's right. And so Holt, that's the only time that Holt ever admitted to killing James King. And again, that's all the way back in the late 1860s. So that would have been 35 years previous. And the only evidence we have of it is when Jacob Dickinson wrote his article describing that conversation and the telling of that story. And Jacob Dickinson actually says something to the effect, this is a significant story in and of itself. I'll only say, for the purpose of this article, that it was described as a duel in the canebrake, and that's the only thing that survives.
Several things strike me about this camp. They're in a wilderness, a low-lying delta wilderness. President of the United States, a lot of dignitaries. Holt's got his trusted staff of woodsmen and hunters. Two different camps. I mean, I read in the description that all those folks were over here, and they were just a little bit further back, but at night, over cocktails and libations around a campfire. All of them are huddled up telling stories, and everybody's equal. You know, one thing I've noticed traveling around the world duck hunting, and I've said this a million times, I've hunted with Pakistani feudal lords, I've hunted with billionaires, I've hunted with poor folks. You put any four men on God's earth in a duck blind, and in that moment, we're all just duck hunters.
All the same.
That's all the same.
That's a good way of putting it. It's a certain noblesse noblesse in the wilderness, and you're exactly right. They had the tent set up for the white hunters and one big large tent set up, but they mixed and mingled. There was no evidence in all the research that I did of any hierarchy.
Well, just as an example, the President of the United States of America insisted that he be addressed as Colonel.
Yeah.
Not as President, as Colonel.
Now, I was given a picture by an old black gentleman named John Johnson. He gave me several pictures that came out of Mr. Wade Hollowell's bank there. One of them, and I've donated them to Mississippi Department of Archives and History, shows the presidential tent, and it shows the American flag standing on top of that presidential tent. Right next to it is an empty cot. One picture shows a man asleep on that cot, whether that's Roosevelt or not, because he's leaned facing the other way. But there's the big log that they built the fire on the other side of, set around, and it had a little shaving stand there, and had these little fold-up chairs and all like that. So it was a true wilderness camp setup is what it was. And Holt was so familiar with those woods and knew the habits of bears so much, knowing that they wasn't going to do a bear hunt where the president going to run in and stick the bear with a knife. He and his guides had gone down there earlier and prepared the campsite areas so it would be ready when the president got there. And they also cut shooting lanes. Isn't that correct?
That's right.
Where when Holt told the president where to sit, that he knew which way he could pull that bear or bring that bear through there, but that the president would have a clear shot as the bear crossed over one of these shooting lanes.
The hunt the next day, keep in mind this is just the first of two hunts that Roosevelt and Collier hunted on. The next morning, about 8 o'clock, they put Roosevelt and Huger Foote on a log right in front of a slough being a body of water that has yet to dry out. All indications are that there had been significant drought or very limited rainfall. And Collier I like to tell the story that Huger Foote was not scheduled to be with Roosevelt on the stand that morning.
Yeah.
E.C. Mangum was scheduled to be on the stand with Roosevelt that morning, only he was suffering from something called indisposition, which, of course, he was hungover. He just didn't want. And Roosevelt was a teetotaler.
From the first night.
From the night previous. So they chose Huger Foote. Huger had a reputation of being an excellent shot and a great hunter, so it was a good combination. And Collier left Roosevelt and Huger Foote with the instructions to stay right here, don't move. And he pointed on the other side of this slough, this body of water, which we don't have a good description of, but I can just see it's the size of a large swimming pool, maybe, I don't know. But on the other side of that slough, that body of water, is a large stand of cane. And my father used to call it blue cane, not a switch cane, but it grows 20 feet high. And there are game trails throughout these stands of cane. And right on the other side of the slough is a game hole, a trail where all game comes and gets water. Now, they've either got to get water out of the slough or they've got to go over to the Little Sunflower River to get water. Everything else is dried up, and that's what Holt knew. So Holt was going to get behind the bear and try to lead that bear to that water. He'll run it till it gets thirsty. It'll go to the water. He had to keep it away from the Little Sunflower because once he quenched his thirst, he'll go anywhere. And so Collier with his men and John Parker, who rode with him every bit of the way. He's a scrappy little guy. I admire him immensely. The way Huger Foote and Theodore Roosevelt described it is they heard Holt and his dogs range far north to their left. And then they would go through the woods. They can't see them, but they can hear them barking and tooting their horns. And they'd go down to the far south. They went north again and then far south till they almost went out of hearing range. And Huger Foote actually suggested, my gosh, he's crossed the Yazoo, or he's gotten down to the Yazoo River. That's way down there. And anyway, they got so they thought Collier wasn't going to make it back. It got to be about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Roosevelt says, I'm hungry, let's go get something to eat. Well, now, Hank can tell you that if you're a guest and you're told to stay in the stand, you do not abandon your stand on a Southern hunt.
You don't disobey your orders.
That's still the rule today.
I don't care if you was even the President of the United States.
That's right.
That's still the rule today. Well, Roosevelt and Huger Foote got on their horses and rode back into the camp and got something to eat. Well, about the time they leave.
Well, wait, before you go there, there's another school of thought.
Oh, yeah?
By looking at pictures of Mr. Foote and prior to that hunt and on that hunt earlier, there is a possibility that Mr. Foote maybe have made the suggestion to go back to camp, not necessarily for a bite to eat, but for a little nip.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, that's very possible. That wouldn't surprise me a bit,
possible.
knowing Huger Foote. But they get back into camp, and Collier gets that bear turned around, and he's successful at keeping that bear away from the Little Sunflower River. And he gets up there close to that slough, and he instinctively knows where he is in the woods. And he's following that bear, I'm going to guess 100 yards, 150 yards, and he instinctively knows when that bear is supposed to pop up there in that slough. And he doesn't hear a shot.
And he later said he could have shot that bear 1,000 times.
He could have shot that bear 1,000 times because he'd been so close to it, but he did not hear a shot, and he immediately becomes upset, disappointed, angry, whatever you want to call it. But he pops out, and the scene that he first encounters is the bear in the slough fighting his dogs. Now, the bear is now gone into bay. And bottom line is like the bear.
He's got the upper hand.
When he goes to bay, he turned and he's ready to fight. It's over there, and the fight's fitting to start.
But he's tired. He's tired of these dogs hassling him and harassing him. He wants to stop and have a drink of this water. Collier comes out and he looks up to the left and he sees that log and there's no Roosevelt or anything. So Collier, this bear is starting to kill his dogs, and one of the other hunters rides into camp to get Roosevelt and Huger Foote, while Collier has to deal with this bear killing his dog. So Collier gets off his horse, still under still instructions not to shoot the bear. As he said, you could have shot him 100 times. And Collier takes his rifle, walks up to the bear who's bent over, hits him over the head.
Didn't he turn Jocko loose by this time?
Well, I'm going to leave Jocko up to you.
Okay, all right.
I can't, but hits him over the head with the barrel of his gun, and according to Collier, the bear then stands up, and Collier's looking straight up at him. He's a full head taller than Collier is. And at this point, Collier realizes he couldn't shoot him if he wanted to because he hit him so hard the barrel is bent. So he retreats back to his horse, gets the rope that he'd been carrying with him since he was a Texas cowboy, brings it back into the slough. I'm going to guess we're knee-deep in water or so, and throws the rope over his head and pulls the bear out and tethers him on a willow tree. And I'll leave the story of Jocko to Hank because it's not as clear on my mind as it is to Hank. But by the time Collier gets this bear tethered up tight to this willow tree, Roosevelt and Huger Foote come riding up.
What happened with Jocko, Hank? That was that little feist dog he carried in a croaker sack.
The story that I had read and understand to be that during the heat of the moment, Holt Collier was quite perturbed that the president disobeyed his explicit orders that he was going to bring that bear back, and to stay there, he brought that bear back. Well, and he did. Roosevelt wasn't there to take the shot. Well, the bear bayed. He was mauling the big dog. Some of the big dogs had run in, and Holt had to make a split decision. He wasn't going to shoot the bear with his rifle because he might hit one of them big dogs. He reverted right back to where something had to happen to the bear. He had to go ahead and take the bear himself. So at that point in time, he let Jocko out of that bag, and he was going to kill the bear the way he always killed bears, was with his knife. So he turned Jocko loose, and the bear reached down as Jocko ran into the water. Now, here's a little 15-pound feist dog, probably no longer than 12, 14 inches tall. Well, the bear reached down and grabbed Jocko and began to maul Jocko, Holt's favorite dog, which I would imagine, and every night when I go to sleep and think about Holt Collier, that little dog slept with Holt Collier.
Probably.
This just before he hits him over the head with a barrel, he hollers, "Let go my bear,
let go my dog, bear, let go my dog."
Yeah,
and he had little Jocko in his grasp, and that's what causes Holt to club his rifle and hit the bear upside the head, which basically cracked his skull and stunned the bear. He had already killed little Jocko, though.
So. And all of this is confirmed by later facts because we've now found the skull, and it's cracked.
Oh.
So it's at any rate, Roosevelt rides up, and the scene is as I've described it, and Roosevelt says the most amazing thing I've ever seen, complimentary and whatnot. And well, the successful hunt doesn't matter; just kill the bear. But Roosevelt realized that to kill a tethered bear would be unsportsmanlike, and he knew he had reporters back at the camp, and this is the beginning of fair chase, which is
the beginning of the concept of fair chase.
The beginning of the
principle. A wild animal, you give it a fair chase.
That's right. That's a principle of Boone and Crockett Club. Yep.
Well, it's the name of their publication.
Yeah,
Fair Chase, and this is when it started. Right here was this hunt. It's the most significant demonstration of when it started that I'm aware of, and so Roosevelt refuses to shoot the tethered bear. The bear is ultimately dispatched by Collier. Oh, John Parker, should I tell this? John Parker wants to kill the bear in the traditional hunter fashion with the knife. So Roosevelt tosses him a dagger-type knife that had been given to him, I read somewhere, from the Emperor of Japan. And John Parker tried to stab the bear and hits a rib and messes things up, something off. The bear just becomes even more angry, and John Parker backs off, and Collier has to put the bear out of his misery in the traditional fashion.
Now, the knives that Collier and those used, Holt Collier used, Harley Metcalf has his great-granddaddy's bear knife, which is a horse rasp that you use filing down horses' hooves. It's 16, 18 inches long, fashioned into a knife. I've seen that knife. I've held that knife. I've tried to build one just like it. Didn't do too good a job with the handle, but the blade ain't that bad.
The closest you could say, it's a Bowie-style
Right.
A large Bowie-style knife. Well, I love to tell the rest of this story that morning because the hunters, including Roosevelt, continue with the hunt. They go on and they're going to, because they're hunting anything, the bears, but if they can find something else, they can hunt it. Collier throws this bear up on the back of his horse and rides into the camp. And the 3 reporters who were there, well, did the president kill this bear? And he said, no, but if he'd have followed my instructions, he would have. And that's the headline. That's the headline that went out across the country from coast to coast. Overconfident president fails to shoot the bear because he failed to listen to the instructions of this lowly, uneducated slave. Holt Collier never learned to even write, to sign his name. He never learned to read or write. And
one of the greatest statements from Roosevelt on that, based on what you were saying right there, was that Roosevelt said he was a man of 50 or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Tell that, give that quote.
Well, I'll dig it up. I'll give it to you in a second, but I'll give it to you right now because I got it right here. This is in my beginning of the book where I cite to you the description that Faulkner uses to describe Sam Fathers, and a description that Roosevelt uses to describe Holt Collier, and they're very close. It's a little bit more than what you want to hear, but he was a man of 60 and could neither read nor write, but he had all the dignity of an African chief, and for half a century had been a bear hunter, having killed or assisted in killing over 3,000 bears. He had been born a slave on the Hines plantation, his father, an old man when he was born, having been the body servant and cook of old General Hines, as he called him, when the latter fought under Jackson in New Orleans. When 10 years old, Holt had been taken on the horse behind his young master, the Hines of that day, on a bear hunt when he killed his first bear. Now, that's Theodore Roosevelt writing about Holt Collier.
And to think of that one statement in there, he was a man of 60 that could neither read nor write, yet had the dignity of an African king.
Yeah. Now, listen.
That raises the hairs on the back of my neck.
Mine too.
Yeah. I know this isn't on the agenda, but listen to the description of William Faulkner describing Sam Fathers. The old man of 70, who had been a Negro for 2 generations now, but whose face and bearing were still those of a Chickasaw chief who had been his father. And he was glad he was old. He had no children, no people, none of his blood anywhere above earth that he could ever meet again. And even if he were to, he could not have touched it, spoken to it, because for 70 years now he had to be a Negro. It was almost over now, and he was glad, but still the woods would be his mistress and his wife. Keeping in mind that William Faulkner would have had the benefit of Theodore Roosevelt's writings.
That's right.
When he wrote that.
That's right.
But
back on the hunt, black, white, rich, poor.
Mm-hmm.
They sat around at campfire, but there's also a story about them having gone up to the water and dipped their horns into the water together, drinking their full of puree of bear and dog and mud.
That's a wonderful description. I wish I could find it in the book.
All
read
held
that.
in a solution.
Oh, you have it.
In water, standing 8 months. I mean, that's some real men right there, bud.
But you got all those men, black and white, on their knees, dipping their horns into a muddy swamp.
That bear and them dogs and everything just been killed and fighting in. That's
puree of dog and mud and blood and bear.
That's it.
And that was just as much part of the tradition as killing the bear with the knife on the side opposite from which you're standing.
There were men back in.
Oh, yes, they were.
I'm going to let you in on a little secret most people don't know about those horns. I think I may have told you this, Hank, but do you know how they communicated with one another? Do you know what the significance of a horn, the tooting of the horns?
They didn't have cell phones back then.
No, I know that.
One toot means, where are you? 2 toots means, I'm here. And 3 toots mean, come running.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. It's that simple.
And they all had these horns because that's how you communicated with your dogs. You get the dogs excited, and then they'd get to squalling, and you'd work your dogs with those dog horns. Well, a lot of times those dog horns are made out of goat's horns because of the volume, the pitch, the highness of the sound of a smaller goat horn one of my deer dog horns is a goat horn, as opposed to a cow horn that gives a big, low, mellow, bellowing type. But each one of them, like mine have said, that's how they communicated.
The few photos and paintings I've seen of Holt Collier, he's got that horn around his neck. I mean, every bit the huntsman. What happened next? The president, they did shoot, I think, several bears and deer, and it was a successful hunt in the Southern tradition, but Roosevelt didn't get his bear. The media was waiting at the train stop. What happened?
In the 1902 hunt, they killed 3 bears, along with a lot of other stuff. But because a Southern hunt is a communal hunt, everybody thought it was a successful hunt except Roosevelt. And Roosevelt wrote about it afterwards as being an unsuccessful hunt, and he feared that it had turned into a picnic. But and I think his hosts were a little disappointed at that. But what happened is the story, when Holt Collier rides in and these newspaper men see it and that goes out, and to their credit, they talk about Holt Collier in almost superhuman terms as having captured this large wild black bear single-handedly, which of course he did. So Collier gets 5 days of really, really impressive coverage from the national media. And this is 1902. This is before Jack Johnson became heavyweight champion. I like to say Holt Collier was the first sportsman of African descent to get national coverage. A fella who ultimately became the Ideal Toy Company started making these little teddy bears and called them teddy bears, and that's the source of it. Is Holt? Thank you, Holt Collier, for giving us the teddy bear.
Thank you, Jocko.
Thank you, Jocko.
Thank you, Jocko.
But he was a toy maker in New York named Mitchum, and there was also cartoonist. The cartoonist for the Washington Post was actually the guy. He portrayed the comic relief character for Theodore Roosevelt prior to the teddy bear was a raccoon. In November the 16th of 1902, Clifford Berryman ran a cartoon in the front page of the Washington Post called Drawing the Line in Mississippi, and that is the birth of the teddy bear. Every Roosevelt cartoon Berryman drew after that included a little baby bear. And it was after this event where Collier captured that large wild black bear that Roosevelt called Holt Collier the greatest hunter and guide I've ever known. And he said that around the campfire the next night.
Mm-hmm. Holt Collier came a long ways, and I know now y'all know the history of the teddy bear. And several years later, they went down to Louisiana cane breaks, and the president again came to come hunt, and they had a guy named Ben Lilly, and who the president, I can't even remember how he described it, but it wasn't very flattering.
He was a goofy old coot and a religious fanatic. I can tell you exactly. Those were the president's words.
And he had walked something like 15 miles that day to get to that camp. And he didn't like to sleep in a tent. He didn't like to sleep in a house. Roosevelt said he slept in the tree on a limb like a wild turkey during a rainstorm, crouched on a tree limb like a wild turkey.
Well, he arrived there. He came walking up, and it had been raining, and he was just pitiful looking, so they had to give him some clothes and whatnot. But Ben Lilly was put in charge of the Louisiana hunt. This is 1907. John Parker is the governor of the state of Louisiana at the time. Holt Collier is there at the specific insistence of Theodore Roosevelt. And on this occasion, the two Metcalf brothers come.
That's right.
And they join this hunt. And this is a 14-day hunt, 14 days in the woods for the President of the United States. It's, out of pocket and out of...
At Bear Lake, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Bear Lake. It ended up at Bear Lake, Louisiana, but the original location of it was about 15 miles east of there. And there used to be a historic sign. It's a little crossroads. But when they got there, I can't remember who chose the site. I don't think it was Ben Lilly. But Collier got there a few days early, and he told the Metcalfs, he says, there are no bear here. There are not enough bear here. There a little bit of so-and-so, and Collier had already scoped out this place down at Bear Lake, and they convinced Roosevelt to abandon the site that had been chosen for him. And this they had built floored tents. I mean, it was a nice site, and they abandoned it and went about 15 miles due west to Bear Lake, and it's good that they did. Bottom line is Ben Lilly's put in charge of this hunt. For 12 days, he runs the hunt, and Roosevelt does not get a bear. It's on the evening of the 12th day that the Metcalfs approach Roosevelt and say, you need to put Holt Collier in charge of this hunt and take Ben Lilly out. And so they did, because Roosevelt didn't want another circumstance of bad press. And so the Metcalfs call Collier over to Roosevelt around the campfire, and they say, you're going to be in charge of this hunt tomorrow morning. And so Collier immediately looked at Roosevelt and said, you listen to me and you do as I say. And I mean, just immediately took
Matter
charge.
of fact, Colonel.
Just immediately took charge, and at 9 o'clock the next morning, he had
wait, tell him what he told the Metcalf boys, which one to ride with him and which one to ride with the president, and what he said about the president.
Oh, he's not a little boy. He can.
He said,
can ride.
well, he wanted one of the Metcalf boys to ride with him and the dogs, because they'd hunted together for years and years. They knew each other. They knew how to hunt. They knew how each other hunted. And he told the other Metcalf, whether it was Clive or Harley, he said, now you take the colonel with you. And he ain't no baby. He can ride with you just like the rest of us can. And that's what Holt Collier said about President Roosevelt. He ain't no baby.
Well, that's exactly what Roosevelt wanted to hear. He didn't want to come down here and sit on a stand. He wrote many times.
He's a rough rider.
I want to ride with the rest of you guys, and nobody would let him do it until Holt Collier was put in charge of the hunt. And at 9 o'clock the next morning, he got his trophy bear. There's
in true hunter fashion.
In true hunter fashion. Those are Roosevelt's words. There's another incident on this 1907 hunt that is worthy of mention. And Hank, you help me out here. But Roosevelt wrote about this, and it was the killing of a large boar. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Down in a creek, and Roosevelt describes it as he saw the whole thing. It was a very substantial boar hog with tusk ablazing, and Collier had killed it in a pretty significant fight, and Roosevelt describes the afterward of it when the Metcalfs have Holt around a campfire, and they're hugging him and holding him because it was cold, and they were rubbing him down because he was exhausted and wet and cold, and they dried him, they bathed him and dried him off and put their clothes on him, and it was something that these are two grown white men taking care of this.
And
here President is watching that, and these other folks are around there watching them, and Holt was in the swamp with that wild hog, killing that hog, I imagine with his knife. Mm-hmm. And when he came out, hypothermia might have been setting into him. He probably chilled like this and shaking and shivering, and they got him around the campfire and stripped him down and rubbed him down with their own towel, drying him off, and put him in their own clothes. And here these two Metcalf brothers are here with their trusted friend, Holt Collier, a black man. And he looks around and he sees the president and sees somebody else looking at him like that. And one of them jumps up and says, now, Holt, don't you ever let me do that to you again.
He wasn't a terribly young man at this point.
No, they were all in their age by then. They're 65 years old by then.
We've got a photograph.
But what that shows is the love and the camaraderie and the bond that these men had.
That's right.
We have a photograph of Holt Collier on the 1907 hunt. At this stage, he's 56 years old. Is that right? He is ramrod straight on that horse.
Yeah, back straight as an arrow.
And wearing his Confederate hat.
Mm-hmm. Real quick.
As a matter of fact, that's the picture.
That's the picture.
That's it.
On the cover of your book. Mm-hmm. Hank, real quick, I think I find this so very interesting, but tell me, years and years and years later, and we're going to come back to this story, folks, you actually reenacted this bear hunt.
Well, they were having a groundbreaking at the Theodore Roosevelt Holt Collier Interpretive Center right close to Smead's Landing, not on it, but close to it, south of Onward. And we were down there, mine was down there, and the rest of us were down there, and one of Roosevelt's great-grandsons, what's his first name?
Kermit.
Who?
Kermit?
No.
No, I'll call him in a second. He was there.
We've had several of the Roosevelt clan come down for these events.
And they came down, and I met the guy, and I'm looking around there, and there's Harley Metcalf, and over there's Billy Percy, and there's Holt Collier's niece. And I said, wait a minute. We've got 5 or 6 of the descendants of the original inhabitants on this hunt. I thought about my friend Hughie Foote, who was...
I was about to say, we knew Hughie Foote, so we knew how to get in touch with him.
So I said, we need to think. We were at that time hunting hogs at Howard Brent's place at Panther Track outside of Yazoo City, which is the Bellwood Run is not but about 15, 20 miles from the Little Sunflower River. And I said, why don't we have a reenactment hog hunt to reenact the bear hunt? We're hunting hogs on horses. We're chasing hogs with dogs. We're killing hogs with knives once the hog bays and the attack dogs go in and grab the hog. So that's a pretty wild idea, but in the Mississippi Delta, not any idea is too wild for us not to do. And I had just cut some big trees down on my farm. So I load up 3 of these big logs, and I take them to Panther Track. We set up a campsite. I have a big canvas, what I call my Montana tent. It's a big guide tent that I had when I was out in Colorado. So I decided to go ahead and set that big tent up, and we set this hog hunt up and get Rob Teagle to come in with his hog dogs, and we're going to have a big time, big party. Well, the Roosevelt guy's coming, and I'm going to have him set up in this big Montana tent, what I called. And I had a big blow-up mattress in it, and my cousin Bard Selden brought a big buffalo rug to carry over it, and somebody else brought a bear skin to lay over one of the logs, and we had this big party planned. Well, word got out to the governor of the state of Mississippi, Phil Bryant. Well, he said he wanted to come to this hunt. Well, he's a big hunter. And so I invited him. Well, sure, you can show up. And then he sent word back that he found out that Mr. Roosevelt is going to be camping out in the tent. He wanted to stay in the tent, too. Hell, I didn't have one tent. So I think I called mine, or we got into an emergency mode. We had to go find another tent to set up for the governor. Well, the governor gets there, and he looks out there, and there's this smaller tent, nylon tent over here, and then there's a big canvas tent. And he looked at me, he said, Hank, I am sure looking forward to staying in that big canvas tent like that. I said, now, wait a minute, Governor. I said, that's the presidential tent. You don't get to stay in that, and you ain't nothing but the governor. You got to stay in this little tent over here. But we had a wonderful time, and we killed some hogs. We didn't kill as many hogs as we normally do when we were down there. The governor never got off the horse the whole time, neither did the Roosevelt guy, and just had a wonderful hunt, a wonderful time, and Minor was there and told the whole story around the campfire and all like that. So we had a great time.
That's a wonderful celebration. That's a wonderful story.
We told a lot of stories around that campfire. And Hank, I don't know if you planned it or not, but it was a night of a full moon.
Yeah.
You remember that? Did you plan that?
Well,
because we had a fire and we had these logs that you brought, and we were sitting around, and it was just classic campfire, full moon. And we'd still be out there now if my wife had about 2:30 in the morning. My wife says, "Y'all, we got to go to bed." And they got everybody's attention. I was willing to stay up to see the sun come up. That was a good night.
All right, it was Simon Roosevelt who was there. We had Simon Roosevelt. We had Billy Percy. We had Harley Metcalf. We had Hughie Foote. We had Holt's niece. What's her name? I'm trying to, but she came during the daytime briefly, I think.
Right.
But there we had 5 or 6 of the original descendants that were on that 1902 bear
And
hunt.
you had an awful lot of other people there who were interested in the story. And
had James McCafferty there talking about the Bobo hunt and all like that.
He was there, that's right. And you had a lot of Deltonians there. And then you had some professional horsemen, the chasers, I call them. Didn't a bunch of guys show up with the tacks and their horses?
We all do whenever it is. We have more
these
fun.
were guys I'd never met before.
We had no more fun on those hunts when these girls show up with their horse. Now, you talking about some gals know how to ride a horse. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of them got on top of the hogs when we was killing them, but you couldn't shake them. We were on one hunt down there, and we had what I call the Red Shoe Riding Club.
Well, you got to say, Bo Weaver was there too, wasn't he?
Bo Weaver was there too. You had Melody and Steve Golden. Melody's got one of the most beautiful, wonderful books out called Wild Boar Hunting Panther Track, Wild Boar Hunting in the Mississippi Delta. And it's a book that she has written and that she's photographed in that thing. And I was down there participating in the hunt, and I saw what was happening when we woke up that morning, and it had snowed about an inch on the ground, and Melody and Steve were already gone taking pictures on this thing. And so it's a wonderful book by Melody Golden, Panther Track, Wild Boar Hunting in the Mississippi Delta.
Which is the exact same place where the reenactment took place.
That's correct.
So,
you know, we got to wrap this up because it's getting. I know everybody's enjoying this story. I sure am. I don't want it to end, but by the time Holt Collier was in his 60s, we're talking about 1912. We're talking only 5 or 6 years after Roosevelt killed his bear finally in that swamp. It was gone. The world that Holt Collier had lived in and the lifestyle he had lived had almost disappeared completely, and it surprised me. Just the same as Sam Fathers and Isaac McCaslin in the Faulkner story. Those times had passed, and that last little bear, like he said, that he was a part of killing, would have been Albert Metcalf's, a 300-pound bear. It was interesting to me that it wasn't until the 1920s that he just became sedentary. He was older, he was tired, and I read somewhere that the children used to pull their pennies and buy him an orange knee-high and a plug of tobacco, and he'd sit around and tell stories about days gone by in a wilderness lost forever. And I'm going to wrap this story up by all sharing this right here. You know, he did die in 1936, born a slave, a Civil War soldier on the Confederate side, I should say. His legacies, the Onward store, you know, right there not far from Smeads was that big monument that I was aware of. They've named an entire refuge complex after him. There's a huge memorial to him in Live Oak Cemetery in Greenville, Mississippi. The official toy of Mississippi is the teddy bear. And you know what struck me as I reread the book for about the 4th or 5th time preceding today's meeting. You know, 1936 wasn't just a long time ago. I mean, I was born 30 years later. And by then, soybeans had become gold on a global commodity market. USDA had incentivized the cutting of the last remaining fragments way down the flood, down in those flood-prone grounds, and they had cut those, even the last stand of bottomland hardwood forest. And break, I'm 30 or 40 years old, and that pendulum has swung completely the other way. Because there's always a pendulum swinging, it seems like, you know, and then the USDA realized we can't grow no crops on those flood plain. We're paying all this crop insurance and everything else. Let's put them back in trees with WRP. And the last time I looked at some of the aerial sats for the Mississippi Delta, that part of the South Delta where this famous bear hunt took place and everything else, and this was been the late 90s that I counted up the acreage, but to include CRP, WRP, existing and restored bottomland hardwood, we were talking about very nearly 500,000 acres have been restored. And we hunt down around Redwood, and I just never will forget it. Just the weight of this story hit me. I was in my early 40s, had 2 little boys, and I was walking to a deer stand down around Satartia, 15 air miles from where the hunt took place. It'd been raining like cats and dogs. I was headed to a covered deer stand, and right there in the mud was the first bear track I'd ever seen in the state of Mississippi.
Well, let me explain a little something that has happened through our government programs, our CRP programs, our WRP programs, and all like that. A lot of this land is being put back into trees. And a lot of these riverine structures, your creeks, your bayous, your sloughs that are having areas put back in trees along those are corridors for the the black bear. And if you go right across the river from Rosedale into Arkansas, you've got a huge area, big island up there. They've got a large contingency of black bear in Louisiana and in that big island area. And those bears, there's nothing for them to swim the Mississippi River. We are having one of the greatest reintroduction of black bear into this habitat, mainly because we're not bringing the bears in here. Bears are coming on their own. We got a couple of mama bears running around over here, and we got some boys over there that want to come to the dance on Saturday night, so they swim in that river, and we're getting bear. I've had bear on my farm outside of Lake Washington before, the radio tracked bears. I've been fortunate enough to go with Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks to recollar some of these bears, to be able to be with them when they know where the mama bears are. They're able to tranquilize them while they weigh them, take DNA samples, take teeth scrapings and all this kind of stuff. And it's really a cool thing to see what the resurgence of the black bear in the Mississippi Delta because of the habitat restoration, preservation, and conservation. So we got a lot of good things going on right there. I'm real proud of that.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for listening to Duck Season Somewhere. I hope y'all have enjoyed this story about a past time and a past place as much as I have. Minor, where can folks find this book? Holt Collier, His Life, His Roosevelt Hunts, and the Origin of the Teddy Bear. Where can they find this?
Well, we've got a website we're setting up called HoltCollier.com, and I'm hoping that it's up and running so people can get it quickly. Soon.
That website's coming, folks. You might try Amazon until then.
Well, you can find it used on Amazon, but it's very expensive. It's in several bookstores in Mississippi. I'm not saying
that's where I got mine.
But it's not nationally featured. It's a local hit, but we're in our 5th printing.
Thank y'all both for your time. Hank,
it's a wonderful book, and what you told me last time we talked that you read 2 books at once. You read Faulkner's Big Woods and you read Holt Collier book, and you do that and you compare both of them and you realize what you were saying, Minor, is that no doubt in my mind, no doubt in your mind that Faulkner didn't take that whole concept straight from Holt Collier.
Nope, he did not. He did not. Folks, see you next time on Duck Season Somewhere.